Welcome to one of the most densely populated places on Earth. When Britain took Hong Kong in 1842, it was just a cluster of fishing villages. In a few decades, they had made it one of the busiest, richest trading posts in the world.
The British Empire wasn't just about conquest and government and chaps in shorts telling foreigners what to do. It was
China, British traders made fortunes from ships freighted with addictive drugs. And they helped themselves to the riches of ancient India. Money flowed to Britain from piracy in the Caribbean and from estates worked by slaves taken from Africa. Empire trade and empire theft helped make Britain a world capital of money it still is today.
raid on the Spanish town of Portobello in Central America. They had stolen a staggering 25,000 pieces of 8. That's the Spanish dollar minted in pure silver. It was worth about £10 million at today's prices.
But this was piracy with a twist. It even had a different, more respectable name: privateering.
It worked like this. The government licensed merchant ships to attack and
place that had recently been seized from the Spanish. The island of Jamaica.
and decided to diversify. He hung up his cutlass and bought 4,000 acres of land on which he built a second fortune. The empire had been conceived in robbery, but it grew fat on the cultivation of sugar. Theft was the past, trade was the future.
The British at home had developed a lust for sugar to sweeten the novelties arriving from the tropics: coffee, chocolate, and tea. The British were already becoming a nation of sugar addicts. Sugar from Jamaican plantations could satisfy their sweet tooth. But the island's population was tiny, and the plantations needed vast amounts of labour. The answer to the problem lay in the traffic of human beings from Africa, the slave trade. The British didn't introduce slavery to the Caribbean, but they took to it with enthusiasm. Traders bought slaves in Africa and then shipped them thousands of miles across the world.
Within 3 years of their arriving here, a third of them would be dead.
By 1775, 1.5 million men, women and children had been forcibly transported from Africa to the British West. Human beings as beasts of burden made the owners of sugar plantations rich. This is the planter's house on the Good Hope estate, built in 1755. Its owner was 23 when he bought it. He became the wealthiest man in Jamaica, owning over 10,000 acres of land and 3,000 slaves. The sugar planters, known as the plantocracy, have letters too, and kept a diary.
Even though we all think we're familiar with the routine horrors of the slave trade, when you read what some of these slave owners did, it really does make your stomach heave. Here are 3 accounts of punishments meted out by Thistlewood in 3 months in 1756. Darby catched eating canes, had him well flogged and pickled, then made Hector shit in his mouth.
rubbed Hazat with molasses and exposed him naked to the flies all day and to the mosquitoes all night. Flogged Punch well, and then washed and rubbed in salt pickle, lime juice and bird pepper. Made Negro Joe piss in his eyes and mouth. Occasions. He would allow his guests to do the same. When these slave owners went to church on a Sunday, they doubtless did so believing they were good Christian folk.
How long ago did your family originally come to this country?
In 1760, according to my grandmother.
And how did they come here?
The first one in that line that they remembered in 1760 when it came over was that actually it was taken from the Gold Coast in Africa.
As a slave?
As a slave, yes. And he ended up in Jamaica. Extended family probably was involved in bringing your ancestors over here as slaves. And yeah.
Doesn't it make you feel furious?
No, I think for now we have passed that in this generation.
Well, let's be realistic. You were, as slaves, being used as beasts of burden, essentially.
Yes, yes. It's hard to understand why some people would want to do that to other people, or want to say, you should work for me for all of your
Eventually, the people in Britain became so outraged by what was happening in the Caribbean that the slave trade was abolished in 1807. But the wealth of the fledgling empire didn't come from slavery alone. There were riches of a different kind to be found on the other side of the world. In the 18th century, this was the home of India's ruling dynasty. The first British visitors were awestruck by what they found.
Places like this must have been absolutely amazing to encounter. You'd arrived from somewhere cold and bleak in the northern hemisphere, and one can only imagine what effect it must have had upon some young lad on the make. There was a throne somewhere in here, the emperor's throne, the peacock throne, which was encrusted with jewels, including the Koh-i-Noor diamond, and an inscription on the wall, oh, that's it up there, in Arabic, which says, if there be paradise on earth, this is it. The effect must have been astonishing.
The earliest Britons in India were traders, men who'd gone there for At the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Clive outwitted the ruler of the state of Bengal, a man who had dared to challenge the power of the East India Company. Clive then walked into the prince's treasury and coolly helped himself to a fortune. He then shipped it in a fleet of 75 barges to the company's headquarters in Calcutta.
Soon afterwards, a new word entered the English language. It was a Hindi word, loot. When Clive returned to England,
they built themselves great palaces in the British style on Calcutta's main street. Many of them still stand today. As for Clive, he became governor of Bengal.
So what had begun in plunder had ended in government, and so it was to prove right across the world. It was the greed of Robert Clive and men like him which built Britain an empire. What is this?
Tamarind.
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 18th century India provided Britain with a spectacular array of goods.
Sheer variety. I mean, of course, I have no idea what most of these.
A new world of taste and colour.
Must be the pepper.
And it wasn't just spices, but fabrics and furniture too. A network of global commerce was bringing the cultures of distant lands closer together.
Mind you, there's a bit of a traffic jam here. Sorry.
It's no surprise to us now that spices come from India. But there was one Indian product that became so familiar, it's hard to believe it didn't originate in England.
So you put all the colours on like this, and what's the finished product?
Yeah, I have some pieces. I'll show you this.
Okay.
These are the final product.
And this is your work, is it?
Yes, sir. It's my work.
This is a traditional
It's the
pattern.
traditional practice.
So is this?
Sports. It became so popular that British cloth makers protested. In 1720, it was actually banned in Britain. And after that, the British started making their own. For more than 3 centuries, it was trade, not conquest, which brought new colonies into was the grandest of them. Canada was opened up by the Hudson's Bay Company, which traded in skins and furs. And the African Lakes Corporation bought and sold the bounty of swathes of Africa. Most were accountable to men sitting in offices thousands of miles away. At the heart of empire was the City of London, the centre of a spider's web of global trade. This was where money was made, goods bought and sold. At the London Metal Exchange, they've been doing business in this way for over 200 years.
It all looks utter chaos down there, with people shouting and making strange gestures and talking into 2 or 3 telephones at the same time. But behind it all is an important clue about why Britain became such a powerful force in the days of the empire.
On floors like this, traders speculated on tin from Malaya, By the end of the 19th century, more than half the world's trade was financed in British pounds. Victorian investors
made their dibs by selling the turds of foreign birds.
Guano was gathered off the coast of Peru and sold as fertilizer. It made a fortune for British businessmen. The Gibbs family made so much money from guano they were able to bankroll much of the Peruvian economy. Victorian Britain, in effect, had 2 empires, one run by politicians, the other by moneymen like Gibbs. In South America, British banks supplied governments with credit. British companies built railways across Argentina. British settlers bought huge ranches and raised cattle. But the real killing to be made in Queen Victoria's empire was from something far more pernicious than bird droppings. And it made some Britons rich beyond their wildest dreams. The former British island colony of Hong Kong is so densely packed with banking and trading firms, it's known as the world's most vertical city. The place lives, eats and breathes money.
The story of how Hong Kong came to be British reflects the empire's often ruthless pursuit of profit. It's an extraordinary story, even if it is one of the most shameful in British history.
And yet this dark episode began innocently enough. It was born from the English passion for a cup of tea.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
How many types of tea do you have?
Mainly it's all the Chinese tea we have.
All of
types,
them?
Yes.
The British were desperate and even sent a delegation to China. They begged the emperor to open up his country and take some British products in exchange for tea. They presented him with all sorts of trinkets, games and curiosities, scientific instruments and toys. But he remained resolutely unimpressed.
We possess all things, said the emperor. I set no value upon things strange or ingenious, and I have no use for your country's manufactures.
But to get the tea they craved, the British had one thing to trade that many Chinese craved even more: opium. The drug was illegal in China, though the ban was widely ignored. There were an estimated 12 million peasants addicted to opium. The authorities there called it a deadly poison ruining the minds and morals of our people. The British grew opium poppies in India. There they processed it in factories on a colossal scale. Finally, it was shipped to China and sold to smugglers. With the profits, British traders bought Chinese tea. Two men in particular made a handsome profit out of opium. One was William Jardine, the son of a Scottish farmer. The other was his business partner and fellow Scot, James Matheson. From boats moored off the Chinese mainland, they sold industrial quantities of opium to be trafficked into China. At the time, selling opium wasn't illegal in Britain, nor
Business was just business.
In 1839, the Chinese emperor decided he'd had enough. he ordered more than 1,000 tons of British-supplied opium to be seized and destroyed. The British government was outraged. It invoked a sacred and very convenient principle, the principle of free trade. Britain had to be allowed to trade what and where she liked, especially in the case of opium.
Opium was making Britain rich. It soon accounted for over a fifth of the income of the government of India. Two mighty empires, each convinced of their own superiority, were now set on collision course.
The Opium Wars were about to begin. Britain's first ocean-going iron warship, the Nemesis, built in Liverpool, was sent out to take on the Emperor's navy. It helped destroy much of it in a single afternoon.
This was the modern world confronting an ancient one, sailing junks against steam-driven gunboats. The Chinese had no choice but to surrender and to open 5 ports to British trade. China had been forced to enter the modern global economy.
Hong Kong was one of Britain's prizes from the Opium Wars.
So this most bustling of British colonies was built on a drug which stupefies people. Even more remarkably, the British continued to ship opium into China until well into the 20th century.
Such a large part in founding Hong Kong's prosperity. Jardine Matheson and Co. Well, they're still here and still doing very well.
These are the modern headquarters of Jardine Matheson. The round windows have earned it the local nickname, the building of 1,000 orifices. At least, that's the polite version. Doubtless, somewhere in the foundations are buried the consciences of its founders.
In 1997, more than a century and a half after the Opium Wars, Hong Kong was returned to China.
foreign power forced it at gunpoint to allow millions of its citizens to be turned into drug addicts.
The spoils of empire made Britannia rich. From the colonies came gold and silver and spices, even plants. And so vast was her empire, Britain could choose to grow them where she liked. Tea bushes could be planted for the first time in India and Ceylon. Tobacco planted in southern Africa. And there was a particular seed that made a very rich empire even richer. In the summer of 1877, a large packing case arrived here in Singapore's Botanic Gardens. Inside the case were 22 seedlings of rubber trees collected by British plant hunters in Brazil. These trees are descended from those original seedlings. Inside them is a milky fluid called latex. You make rubber from it. The director of the Botanic Gardens, Henry Ridley, was a man with a vision. He saw the truly massive potential of rubber and launched a crusade to convince every planter in the region to grow it.
Ridley stuffed the planters' pockets with rubber seeds. He lectured them on how to protect their plants. He waved specimens of processed rubber under their noses. He was a man obsessed. They called him Rubber Ridley. That was to his face.
Responsible for most of what we see here in the rubber industry today.
Now, Ridley came up with a new way of tapping rubber trees, didn't he?
Yeah, the methods used were pretty harsh before that. They will hack into the rubber tree, injuring the vascular cambium, which is necessary for the tree's survival. And what actually happened was on one side, you can actually let it heal while you tap the other side for another 5 years. Basically, it is cut in an angle.
So this, that's latex, is it?
That's latex, yes.
There's a bowl or something down here to collect it?
Yes.
Guy, it's really prolific, isn't it? It's sticky, isn't it? A pair of rubber gloves there or something, maybe.
Yeah.
Ridley was so excited because he knew just how much rubber could be worth to the British Empire. Rubber was the plant. Millions of rubber trees were planted in Singapore's neighbouring British territory, Malaya. and thousands of workers were brought in from another colony, India, to work on the vast new estates. All over the empire, British ships sailed home with cargoes of rubber or cotton or bananas. They went back to the colonies loaded with things manufactured in Britain. Teapots, saucepans, knives, even cloth caps. But one product would put Britain and its most important colony on a collision course: cotton. British factories took raw cotton from India and spun it into cloth. By the 1920s, Lancashire's cotton mills dominated the world market. It was the final insult. The leader of the Indian independence movement, Mahatma Gandhi, burned his suit and adopted the dress of an Indian peasant. He took the spinning wheel as a symbol of Indian freedom and told his countrymen to stop buying British cloth. Then came extraordinary news. Gandhi was coming to Britain and would visit Lancashire. He was entering the lion's den, coming to see for himself the effect the Indian boycott was having on textile workers here.
Then came the little man, still scantily clad, but with an extremely wet blanket around his tiny frame. I'm sure he must have been frozen. We were in thick overcoats.
The local paper praised Gandhi's celebrated sympathy for the poor. Surely his heart would soften at the sight of
surrounded by these happy children and seeing the homes of the poor.
Mill workers took their children to see this remarkable visitor. Some of them still remember it.
Hello, you must be Ruth. I'm Jeremy. Hello. How do you? Can I come in? Thank you. What did your mother tell you you were going to do when you set off that day to go and see Gandhi?
Well, she just said, we're going to see a very important man from India, and he's going to make things better, we think. Which is Gandhi, Mother. She said, is that man there? And I said, but he's not an important man. I said, he's a poor little man. He has no clothes on.
He had sort of a white tight cloth between his legs.
Well, it was like a big nappy.
Yes, it did, to be honest.
Just looked like that, and then and this thing round his, and it was hugged round him like that.
Yes, it is.
80 years after the event?
Yes.
80 years.
Gandhi had not come all the way from India to call off his boycott. He had a far bigger vision: to make the workers of Britain sympathetic to the plight of the Indian people and eventually get independence in 1947.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
I'm waiting to meet a group of people who devote much of their lives to celebrating one of Empire's more curious remnants: the Royal Enfield motorcycle.
मंजिलों का निशान ये बुलेट मेरी जा मंजिलों का निशान एनफील्ड बुलेट गजब की सवारी बुलेट ये बुलेट.
You're bored too, aren't you?
The Royal Enfield motorcycle has become as much a feature of Indian roads as painted trucks and wandering cows.
Thank you for coming. Cal would like to thank you too. Now, who's the chief here? You're the chief. You're Amit, are you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Good. I want to ask you about, what is it? Your club is they're the
Royal Riders Club.
The Royal Riders Club. Hi, I'm Jeremy. Hi. Hello.
Amit.
And how many members have you got?
70 members.
70? Well, you've got half of them here.
Yeah, half of them are here.
And what is it that you only ride Royal Enfields?
Yeah, only.
But how many of these are bullets? They're all bullets, are they?
They're all bullets.
That was the great slogan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Built like a rifle, goes like a bullet.
Yeah.
And why do you like...
that we are free.
You say it's a symbol of freedom.
Yes.
But isn't it a symbol of the British Empire too?
No, because we take the best part of the regime and not the worst part. That is why we say this is the symbol of freedom. We have taken the best part and thereafter now we are free.
Good. Got a big head too. I feel more virile already.
This great old-fashioned machine Some believed they were bringing light into the world. Others simply that they had a right to rule it. Did the visionaries of empire help or harm the modern world?
To order a free Open University poster exploring the legacy of Britain's empire, go to bbc.co.uk/empire or call 0845 366 8021.